All right, guys, we are picking up in our story, The One and Only Ivan, and we are starting at the chapter called 12 today. So, just like yesterday, I'm going to be chunking my chapters, doing a couple at a time, and it'll make it go a little bit quicker. What I am going to do is for one of the two chapters that I'm going to be reading back to back today, right now, is we have a vocab word, monstrosity. I definitely spelled monstrosity wrong. Give me one sec. All right, so we have this vocabulary word, monstrosity. So our definition for monstrosity is something such as a building that is very large and ugly. We're going to take out the building part from this. Remember, our words have lots of different connotations sometimes versus the denotation. So the dictionary definition versus, how something sounds positive or negative. And it also sometimes has varying definition just because we as humans, we change our language over time. So when we're thinking about monstrosity, I want you to think that something that is very large and ugly. It doesn't just have to be a building, right? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with chapter 12. Before I read, please remember that previously we were reading Ivan is trying to save Ruby, and he's doing it through painting a picture of Ruby in a zoo. And one of the things we said Ivan might be trying to do is getting humans to help save Ruby. So we're going to read chapter 12 and H back to back. I lie in my cage with Bob on my stomach. We are watching Julia do her homework. She doesn't seem to be enjoying it. I can tell because she is sighing more than usual. Again, for the 100th time, or maybe the 1,000th, I wonder what is missing from my painting. And for the 100th time, or maybe the 1,000th, I don't have an answer. Dad, Julia says as George passes with a mop, can I ask you a question? May I? George corrects. Ask away. Julia glances down at a piece of paper. What's the difference between the word spelled P-R-I-N-C-I-P-A-L and the one spelled P-R-I-N-C-I-P-L-E? The first one is the head of a school, like Miss Garcia. The second one is a belief that helps you know what's right or wrong. He smiles. For example, it's against my principles to do my daughter's homework for her. Julia groans. Ugh, if I'm going to be an artist when I grow up, why do I need to know how to spell? With a laugh, George heads off. Poor Julia, I think. Gorillas get by just fine without learning how to spell. All those endless letters, those sticks and circles, zigzags, filling up books and magazines, billboards and candy wrappers. Words. Humans love their words. I leap up. Bob goes flying straight into my pool. A word. You know how I feel about wet feet, Bob yells. He scrambles out of the water, shaking each foot in dismay. I look out my window at the billboard. I can still hear Mac's voice in my head. Come to the Exit 8 Big Top Mall and Video Arcade, home of the one and only Ivan, mighty Silverback. I count to 12, and then I count again just to be sure. H. I lay out 16 pieces of poster board, 4 down, 4 across, a perfect square. What are you up to? Bob demands. I'm guessing it doesn't involve sleep. It has to do with the billboard. That sign's a monstrosity, particularly since I'm not featured. I grab my bucket of red paint. You're not on the billboard because you're not in the show, I point out. Technically, I don't even live here, Bob says with a sniff. I'm homeless by choice. I know, I'm just saying. I study the billboard. Then I make 2 fat lines like broom handles. Another fat line connects them. I stand back. What do you think? So here is what he has done. What is it? No, wait, let me guess. A ladder. Not a ladder, I say. A letter. At least, I think that's what they're called. I have to make 3 more. Bob cuddles up next to Not Tag. Why? He asks, yawning. Because then I'll have a word. A very important word. I dip my fingers into the paint. What word? Bob asks. Home. Bob closes his eyes. That's not so important, he says quietly. All right. Let's go to our questions, guys. So for the chapter 12, what is Yvonne's picture missing? What does he think his picture is missing? By now we know. We know what he's figured out it's missing, right? It's a word, right? His picture is missing a word. So why do you think Ivan has chosen this word? Why has he chosen the word home to put on his picture of Ruby in a zoo? This is an opinion question. So go ahead and write it out. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead. We're going to read the next 3 chapters back to back to back again. So we're starting with the chapter Nervous. All day long, I knuckle walk circles around my cage. I'm so nervous, I can't nap. I can't even eat. Well, not much anyway. I'm ready to show Julia what I've made. It has to be Julia. She's an artist. Surely she'll truly look at my painting. She won't notice the smudges and tears. She won't care if the pieces don't quite fit together. She'll see past all of that. Surely Julia will see what I've imagined. I watch Ruby trudge sullenly through the 4:00 show, and I wonder what will happen if I fail. What if I can't make Julia understand? But of course, I know the answer. Nothing. Nothing will happen. Ruby will remain the main attraction at the Exit 8 Big Top Mall and Video Arcade, conveniently located off of I-95, with shows at 2, 4, and 7, 365 days a year after year after year after year. Showing Julia. It's time to show my work. The mall is silent except for Thelma the macaw, who is practicing a new phrase. Uh-oh. Julia is finishing her homework. George is sweeping outside. Mac has gone home for the night. I grab Not Tag and carefully pull out the folded papers. So many paintings. Page after page, piece after piece of my giant puzzle. I pound on my glass, and Julia glances over. Fingers trembling, I hold up one of my paintings. It's brown and green, a corner piece. Julia smiles. I display another picture, and another, each a tiny part of the whole. Julia looks confused. But what is it? She asks. She shrugs. It doesn't matter. It's pretty just as it is. Uh-oh, says Thelma. No, I think. No. It does matter. More paintings. George calls out to Julia. He's done for the night. Grab your backpack, he says, and hurry, it's late. Gotta go, Ivan, Julia says. Julia doesn't understand. I have to find the right pieces. I dig through the pile. They're here somewhere. I know they are. I find one, another one, another. I try to hold 4 of them up against the glass. Bob, I say, help me, hurry. Bob grabs paintings with his teeth and drags them to me. One by one, I shove pictures through the window crack. They crumple and tear. There are too many pieces. My puzzle is too big. Careful, Ivan, Julia says. Those might be worth millions someday. You never know. She arranges the paintings into a neat stack. I suppose Mac will want to sell these at the gift shop. Still, she doesn't understand. I shove more through the hole, and more, all of them one after another. So Ivan's been painting, has he? George says as he puts on his coat. A lot, says Julia with a laugh. A whole lot. You're not taking those all home with you, are you? George asks. I mean, no offense to Ivan, but they're just blobs. Julia thumbs through this towering stack of paintings. They might not be blobs to Ivan. Let's leave those by the office, George suggests. Mac will try to sell them. Although why anyone would pay $40 for a finger painting a 2-year-old could do, I don't know. I like Ivan's work, Julia says. He puts his feelings into them. He puts his hair into them, George says. Julia waves goodbye. Night, Ivan. Night, Bob. I press my nose against the glass and watch her walk away. All of my work, all my planning wasted. I look at Ruby sleeping soundly, and suddenly I know she'll never leave the Big Top Mall. She'll be here forever, just like Stella. I can't let Ruby be another one and only. All right, guys. So, what is the risk for nothing to happen? What does Ivan say? If nothing happens, Ruby just does what? Showing Julia. Do we think Julia will understand? Last one's an opinion question. What does Ivan mean by can't let Ruby be another one and only? What does that mean? We're going to read the next 2 chapters back to back, guys. Chest beating. Often when visitors come to see me, they beat their hands against their puny chests, pretending to be me. They pound away, soundless as the wet wings of a new butterfly. The chest beating of a mad gorilla is not something you ever want to hear, not even if you're wearing earplugs, not even if you're 3 miles away wearing earplugs. A real chest beating sends the whole jungle running, as if the sky has broken open, as if men with guns are near. Angry. Thump. The sound, my sound, echoes through the mall. George and Julia spin around. Julia drops her backpack. George drops his keys. The pile of pictures go flying. Thump, thump, thump. I bounce off the walls. I screech and bellow. I beat and beat and beat my chest. Bob hides under not tag, his paws over his ears. I'm angry at last. I have someone to protect. What was the chest beating chapter foreshadowing, right? What was that chest beating chapter foreshadowing? And then an angry, what is the purpose of Ivan's anger? In our next chapter, guys, we have a vocab word, disarray. I definitely spelled disarray wrong. I added an extra S, I believe. Nope. Yep, I forgot another R. Okay, so disarray is a lack of order, a confused or messy condition. Your room might be in disarray if you haven't cleaned it frequently. All right, guys, we're going to read this chapter puzzle pieces by itself. It's a longer chapter, so we don't have to group it. Puzzle pieces. After a long while, I grow quiet. I sit. It's hard work being angry. Julia looks at me with wide, disbelieving eyes. I'm panting. I'm a little out of shape. What the heck was that? George demands. Something's really wrong, Julia says. I've never seen Ivan act this way. He seems to be calming down, thank goodness, George says. Julia shakes her head. He's still upset, Dad. Look at his eyes. My pictures are scattered all over the floor like huge autumn leaves. What a mess, George says, sighing. Wish I hadn't bothered sweeping tonight. Do you think Ivan's okay? Julia asks. Probably just a temper tantrum, George says. He reaches under a chair to retrieve a brown and red picture. Can't say I blame the guy, stuck in that tiny cage all these years. Here are all the pictures across the floor. Julia starts to answer, but then she freezes. She cocks her head. She stares at her feet where my pictures lie in disarray. Dad, she whispers, come see this. I'm sure he's another Rembrandt, George says. Let's pick these up and get going, Jules. I'm exhausted. Dad, she says again, seriously, look at this. George follows her gaze. I see blobs. Many, many blobs, along with the occasional swirl. Please, can we go home now? That's an H, Dad. Julia kneels down, straightening one picture and then another. That's an H. And here, she grabs more pictures. This one here, and I don't know, maybe that one. You have an E? George rubs his eyes. I hold my breath. Julia is running now. She picks up one picture, sets down another. It's like a puzzle, Dad. This is something. It's a word, maybe words and a picture of something. A giant picture. Jules, George says, this is crazy. But he's looking at the floor too, wandering from picture to picture and scratching his head. H, Julia says, E, O, Ho? Julia chews her lower lip. H-E-O, and that looks a lot like an I. H-E-O-I? George writes in the air with his fingers. I-E-O-H? Not a letter, an actual I. And that's a foot, or maybe a tree. And a trunk. Dad, I think that's a trunk. Julia runs to my window. Ivan, she whispers, what did you make? I stare back. I cross my arms. This is taking much longer than I thought it would. Humans. Sometimes they make chimps look smart. All right. What does Julia discover in this chapter? What does she realize about the paintings? All right, guys, pause the video if you need to. We're going to read the next chapter finally, all in one go. It's another longer chapter. Your vocab words for this chapter are logo and publicity. So our definition for logo is a symbol that is used to identify a company that appears on its products. It doesn't just have to be a company. Usually a logo is something that identifies a company or a person, right? So think of like Microsoft. What's Microsoft's logo? Or Apple. What is the Apple logo, right? Publicity, something that attracts the attention of the public. The public can be people, newspapers, magazines, television, news programs, etc. So go ahead, pause this if you need to write this in. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start reading. All right, guys, this is our last chapter of the day 2. So finally, Julia and George take the pictures to the ring where there's room to see them all. An hour passes by as they try to assemble my puzzle. Ruby's awake now, and she and Bob and I watch. Ivan, Ruby says, is that a picture of me? Yes, I say proudly. Where am I supposed to be? That's a zoo, Ruby. See the walls and the grass and the people looking at you? Ruby squints. Who are all those other elephants? You haven't met them, I say. Yet. It's a very nice zoo, Ruby says with an approving nod. Bub nudges me with his cold nose. It is indeed. In the ring, Julia pumps her fist in the air. Yes, she cries. I told you, Dad. There it is. Home. Home. George gazes at the letters. He spins around to look at me. Maybe it's just a coincidence, Jules. You know, a once in a trillion kind of a thing. Like that old saying about the chimp and the typewriter. Give him long enough and he'll write a novel. I make a grumbling noise, as if a chimp could write a letter, let alone a book. Then how do you explain the rest of it, Julia demands. The picture of Ruby in the zoo? How do you know it's a zoo, George asks. See the circles on the gate? There's a red giraffe in it. George squints and tilts his head. Are you sure that's a giraffe? I was thinking more along the lines of a deformed cat. It's the logo for the zoo, Dad. It's on all their signs. Explain that. George gives her a helpless smile. I can't begin to. I'm just saying there has to be a logical explanation. Look at how big this is. Julia put the last piece of Ruby's ear right into its place. It's huge. It's definitely large, George agrees. Julia watches me. She chews on her thumbnail. I see the question in her eyes. She turns back to the paintings and stares at them, looking, truly looking. A slow smile dawns on Julia's face. Dad, she says, I have an idea. A big idea. Julia races around the edge of my painting, her arms spread wide, billboard big. I'm not following you. I think this is meant to be on a billboard. That's what Ivan wants. George crosses his arms over his chest. What Ivan wants, he repeats slowly. And you know this because you two have been chatting? Because I'm an artist and he's an artist. Uh-huh, says George. Julia clasps her hands together. Come on, Dad, I'm begging you. George shakes his head. No, I'm not doing that. No billboard, no way. I'll get the ladder, Julia says. You get the glue. I know it's dark out, but the billboard's lit. Mac'll fire me, Jules. Julia considers. But think of the publicity, Dad. Everyone would know about Ruby. You want me to put up a sign that shows Ruby in a zoo with the word home in giant letters? George gestures towards my picture. A sign, incidentally, that just happens to have been made by a gorilla? Exactly. And you want me to do it without Mac's permission, George asks. Exactly. No, George says. No way. Julia goes to the edge of the ring, careful not to step on any of my paintings. She picks up Mac's claw stick. She walks back and hands it to her father. George runs a finger along the blade. She's just a baby, Dad. Don't you want to help her? But how would it help, Jules? Even if lots of people see Ivan's sign, it doesn't mean anything's going to change. I'm not exactly sure yet. Julia shakes her head. Maybe people will see the sign and they'll know this isn't where Ruby belongs. Maybe they'll want to help too. George sighs. He looks at Ruby. She waves her trunk. It's a matter of principle, Dad. Principal. George corrects. Dad, Julia says softly, what if Ruby ends up like Stella? George looks at me, at Ruby, at Julia. He drops the claw stick. The ladder, he says quietly, is in the storage locker. So, how do you think a billboard will help? Opinion question, guys. These are both opinion questions. So we finally know what the painting is. They finally figure it out, what's going on in the painting. How do you think a billboard's going to help? What's your opinion? And then our second question is, what do you think will happen to Julia and George? They're definitely going to make Mac angry with this probably, right? So how is this? What might happen to them? All right, guys, that's everything for today. We are making good time with this, so we're going to pick up again on Friday.